this one. There we go. Let's be adjusted a little bit in that direction then. Just a little bit. There we go. Sound check. 1, 2, 3. Oh, if he steps this way. Okay.
Hello, how are you?
Pretty good.
I wonder if Dale's doing fast today.
Pardon?
Dale or Ron?
I think it's gonna be daylight.
Yeah, because Ron appears to be out of town still, huh?
Yeah.
Well, down. I can shoot. missed you at the party last night.
It must have been a good one, I guess.
It was good. It was all right. A lot of good eating.
I bet it was chaotic with all them kids there, wasn't it?
Yeah, that had it. You know what? It was kind of nice because they were just singing karaoke, having a blast, man. You
Oh,
know?
they had karaoke?
Yeah.
I can imagine how that would go with a bunch of kids and adults all trying to.
Well, Rhonda kept them under control pretty good, so it went rather
I
well.
bet she did.
It kind of scares me then. So far.
How are you doing?
Oh, how are you?
Good. Hanging in there.
It's so good to see you.
It's good to be out.
It's wonderful. I heard you didn't have to put that in a cast, too.
Yeah, well, they just took it out of the big cast now because they want me to move my fingers, keep them moving so they don't stiffen. Some nice how they come up with these kind of, you can take it off, put it on one things.
Yes, that is.
Beats them kind you can't take off, I'll tell you. I was so excited whenever they told me this and put this kind back on.
Oh,
Okay.
that's good.
Hi, Karen.
Good. I'm so glad you're here. Is it? It's probably early.
This wasn't the same without you, Joe. Just let you know.
We could do that, I'm
The
sure.
party wasn't the same without you.
Well, I appreciate that.
You're just always there.
Yeah.
Or this was, Indy shared that, I didn't like that. I didn't like Indy shared there.
Oh.
Well, hi, Karen.
Hello. How are you?
I think I'm awake.
By the time you got home, it's time to go to bed. That's how it was with me too. I did nothing but get ready to go to bed.
Well, I didn't even hang close up. Usually I don't do that. And so I just grabbed what was there.
Oh, right. I usually put mine. I kind of decided I was going to wear this skirt, but you know. Right.
And I like this sweater too. It's so pretty.
It's the first one I ever had. Merry Christmas. So I hope I can find some
Very difficult. It's just loose.
It's okay. You'll learn. You know where to meet me.
Yeah, I was going to say.
On top of this, I can feel my sore throat. It's been a week ago now.
Yeah, I couldn't even call my son the other day.
You still sound like raspy.
I called calling me, tell me
Man, I
it
can't
wasn't working. It was me that wasn't
You
working.
got it. But I was a doctor. Lucy, I was taking stitches out. All the germs are at doctor's offices.
If you're not sick when you get there, you will be relieved. Yeah.
That's what happened.
Yes.
Oh, he's got a different card in there.
This was when she had a mask on, so. Look, this is Jake's creations. I got some that matched it, but I started, how do you get
Okay.
Wait a minute, I don't know what
Recording is not on yet.
36.
No. Not coming on?
We get a lot more.
There it is, yeah. You got it now.
No, you do, I do.
I didn't touch it either.
You
It just fell again. All right.
Time lapse.
Ron is not here this morning. Ron and Taylor, they're out of town. So he sent me a message Thursday and said I wasn't able to get hold of Cal, and so I said I'd get something together. So we're going to do something a little bit different this morning. I don't have any slides. That's why I wrote the scriptures up there. If you can't read my writing, I'm sorry. But we're going to begin at 2 Peter chapter 1 and look at the verses there, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. But what we're going to talk about is establishing good habits. And I don't know of any sick this morning, other than the fact that other people that we continue to list on our prayer list. So let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this beautiful Lord's Day, for the many blessings You've given us, and for the privilege we have of being able to assemble together to be able to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We're thankful, Father, for each and every member here, for the encouragement that we bring to each other, and we ask that You would be with us, that we would always give You the praise and the glory, and that we would not do anything and bring any shame or reproach upon Thee or upon the church. And we ask, Father, that You be with our members who are, due to age and poor health, not able to get out, and we have others who have physical issues. We ask that You would be with them, and we ask that You would use us as instruments that we might reach out and help in any way that we can. We're thankful, Father, for Your Word, and we ask that You would be with us this morning as we discuss the words in Your Scriptures, that we might have a full understanding of those things You expect us to know, that we might be the kind of Christians You would have us to be. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. All right, we're going to read 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 2 through 12, and I'll break this up. You going to leave me, John?
No.
Or are you going to change Bibles?
Find one that's got a print big enough that doesn't.
Print is big enough. Let's see.
There's one up here.
I don't have one up
Doesn't
here,
work.
John. I'm sorry.
Sure. I got it.
Is that big enough?
This is work.
Okay.
Got them little fine prints. I couldn't even find
No, I'm sorry.
it. Look just like lines.
All right. Karen, could we begin with you this morning? If you would read verses 2 Peter chapter 1, and read verses 2 through 6, and then Donna, if you'd read 7 through 12 for me.
By which He has granted to us His precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. For this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with steadfastness, and steadfastness with godliness.
Sorry. And
Verse 7 there, I'm sorry, Donna.
and in your godliness, brotherly kindness, and in your brotherly kindness, love. For if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they render you neither useless nor unfruitful in the true knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. For he who lacks these qualities is blind or short-sighted, having forgotten his purification from his former sins. Therefore, brethren, be all the more diligent to make certain about His calling and choosing you, for as long as you practice these things, you will never stumble. For in this way, the entrance into the eternal kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ will be abundantly supplied to you. Therefore, I will always be ready to remind you of these things, even though you already know them and have been established in the truth which is present with you.
All right. So if you look at verses 3 through 14, obviously these are the great Christian virtues that we always talk about. But one of the interesting things is in verse 10 where Peter says, "Brethren, be even more diligent to make your call and election sure, for if you do these things, you will never stumble." And what we want to talk about this morning a little bit is just establishing good habits, because as human beings, we spend a lot of time and money on education. We learn fundamental skills and search for information that makes us stand out in the job market. And as well, we teach our children. Even when they whine and they moan about schoolwork, we continue to teach our children so that they are prepared to take care of themselves. All our learning allows us to make rapid and accurate decisions because of the fact that we develop habits. We can communicate them to others clearly. what once took hours to do can be done almost by habit. If you think about any great athlete and everything, they become a great athlete by practice. And they develop a habit. I once worked for an individual. His wife was a concert pianist. And he told me a story one time. He said that someone came up to his wife and said, "Man, I wished I could play like this." And she said, "Do you really wish you could play like this? If you wished you could play like this, you would practice every day, at least 2 hours every day, to become a concert pianist." And the truth is, when we really want to do something, we develop a habit by continuing to work on it. Because habits are the auto response that we instilled in ourselves. Whether they are good habits or whether they are bad habits. We develop these. We teach ourselves these habits. So, habits, when you think about it, are instilled in childhood, and they last a lifetime when they are developed in early age. For example, a few of us need to think about walking. I remember as we looked at little children and everything, when they first learn to walk, they fall. They stumble. But when they eventually learn to walk, then you can see their steps are kind of choppy and everything. Eventually they learn to run. But these are things that they continue to develop. And it is a habit that is well ingrained in our memory today. It's just automatic. We get up and we start walking. Why? Because we learn this at an early age. Yet in childhood, we also pick moral habits. Look at Proverbs 22 and verse 6, if you would. Florence, do you have that?
Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it.
So we instill sound, good habits, if you will, in our children so that when they are older, they need not think about it because they will do the right thing. And another way to look at it, they will have to make a conscious decision to do wrong if they are trained up in the right way. Any thoughts about this? Fairly simple and straightforward, but turn to Lamentations chapter 3 and verses 25 through 30. Now what we'll see here, these good moral habits are instilled by repetitive application. Chuck, you had that Lamentations 3, 25 through 30?
Sure. The Lord is good to those who wait for him. The soul who seeks him, it is good that one should hope and wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone and keep silent, because God has laid it on him. Let him put his mouth in the dust. There may yet be hope. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes him, and be full of reproach.
I once have heard foolish parents, and maybe you've heard the same thing. They'll make a comment, and I'm going to use a generic name here. It says, "We want Johnny not to feel forced to come to worship service, so we don't make him go." And because of that attitude, Johnny develops a habit of missing services. And what do you think Johnny does when he grows up?
He doesn't go.
He doesn't go. And I have to admit, I have relatives that have that attitude as well, that, well, we don't want to force our children to have to do something they really don't want to do, so we don't make them go to worship service if they don't want to go. And yet, at the same time, these same parents would make them go to school. Why?
That doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And what about the parents that send their children to church and don't go themselves?
Now, my mother was that person.
I'm sorry to hear that.
There's a good story in that, though, Chuck. When I was growing up, my mother would literally drive us to the Methodist church doors and drop us off at the front door. And we would go into Bible class and we would walk home.
Yeah.
My mother was not a Methodist. Now, why she chose that religion, I don't know. My grandparents never, to my knowledge, never walked into the doors of a church building. They didn't go to my mother's funeral. They didn't go to my dad's funeral. They didn't go to my sister's funeral. Their attitude was, we want to remember them the way they were. Now, the good positive thing about it is when I went to college and everything, of course, back up a little bit. When I was in middle school, I left home and went to work for a farm family that happened to be members of the church. And every Sunday morning they would take me to worship service. So when I went to college and everything, between my freshman and sophomore year, I was baptized. And later on, my mother became a Christian. My dad never did. My dad, the only time he ever went into the church building was when we buried him. And we carried him in there. But my mother, my sister, and my two sisters and my brother were all baptized. So there was a good story to that. But growing up, the habit was instilled to go to the Methodist Church. And through my life and everything, I've probably gone to 10 different religions. Why, I don't know. Sometimes it was because I was dating a girl. Sometimes it was because I was working for this couple. I've been in the Catholic building. I've been in the Presbyterian. I've been in the First Christian. My dad's parents, his father never went to worship service, but his mother went to a non-denominational religion that met in the homes. And they didn't pay preachers or anything, but they did have female preachers. They wouldn't baptize in a baptistry. They had to have running water. And so twice a year they would go to a river somewhere and they would have this big baptism. So these are the kind of religions. But the point is that as we're growing up, oftentimes the habits that are instilled in us when we're growing up is the habits that we live with later on in life. Youth is the time to instill good habits in an individual. I have to admit, when I was young, I tried smoking. Fortunately, I hated the taste of tobacco, so that wasn't a problem. I tried drinking. And I'd been drunk one time in my life, and that was enough. Because I had the dry heaves for 3 days. And I said, why would anybody put that kind of poison into your system? I was only I was 18 at the time. And I had a couple of friends that he turned 21, and so we went out and had a drinking party. Didn't do that anymore. So my parents were good moral people, but they were not Christians raising us up in a Christian environment. But they did raise us up into a moral environment where we knew right from wrong. We knew that these things should not be done. And so youth indeed is the time to instill good habits. Ecclesiastes, the 12th chapter and verse 1. Sharon, you had that?
Sure. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near you, when you say, I have no pleasure in them.
And so the idea is, as the Ecclesiastes writer is pointing out here, is that this is the time to instill good habits in an individual. Listen to the benefits bestowed in Proverbs 3:21 through 26. John, you had that?
The son, let not them depart from thine eyes. Keep sound wisdom and description. So shall they be life unto thy soul, and grace to thy neck. Thou shalt walk, then shalt thou walk in thy way safely, and thy foot shall not stumble. Then, when thou liest down, thou shalt not be afraid. Yea, thou shalt lie down, and thy sleep shall be sweet. Be not afraid of sudden fear, neither of the desolation of the wicked when it comes. For the Lord shall be thy confidence, and shall keep thy foot from being taken.
All right. So as you see there in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 21 through 26, there are some good benefits bestowed here that we see, and something for each one of us to think about as the proverb writer writes these things. But in the days of Israel's king, there was a wicked woman, and she decided to set herself up as queen of Judah. And to accomplish this, she killed every male grandchildren, and as a result, leaving no one left in the throne when her son died. But there was one grandson that was saved by the high priest, who took the young boy and raised him when he was 7 years old. Jehoiada set him up as king. Look at 2 Chronicles, if you will, chapter 24 and verses 1 and 2. Isaac, you have that?
Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest.
So Joash was a good king as long as Jehoiada was there to advise him. Had it not been for Jehoiada to develop these good habits in Joash, then Joash would not have been a good king. Because the environment around Joash and everything was not a good environment. When you have a woman who had set her up to be queen, killing all the male children to make sure that there was nobody to take her place. But it wasn't goodness that Joash developed as a habit, but a habit of listening to others. This is not always a good trait in a leader, though, when you listen to others, because sometimes others will give you the bad advice, won't they? Good habits have to be developed to where you no longer have to listen to someone else, but you can make the decisions on your own, and they would be the right decisions. Any thoughts? Yes, Chuck.
However it is that you get the truth in you, it's, there's so many different ways, as you pointed out, and different examples but however it is that you obtain the truth, and it's pretty plain to see. There's a simple rule here. You take these things into your mind and into your heart, and you have something that's tied to your conscience. So when someone tries to tell you something that's wrong, the red flags go up. Or when you hear something that's not right, someone tries to teach you something or teach something that's not right, red flags go up. When you're around people in your life, and if it's gossip, red flags go up. Or if it's a lie, red flags go up. And these things will keep you walking a certain way. My father had all kinds of great things he taught me. You're going to do something, do it right or don't do it. Whenever I deviated from doing something, by shortcut something, I always failed at it. Whenever I did exactly what he said to do. So some of these things are good in themselves, and they're smart. He would always say this too: if you don't have anything good to say about someone, don't say it.
Don't say it. Yeah.
Don't say it. These things are true in themselves, but they came from the Almighty. These things are right. The right things are what you need to have. So I've got lots of red flags that just seem to fly up around me, and I try to stay between the lines. And everybody tries to do that if they've been raised right. I think that's what we're saying.
Exactly right. In fact, and of course I'm sharing a few stories and everything, but when I was a young lad, I think maybe a freshman in high school, I wanted a 20 gauge pump shotgun. Now, everything I got during the summertime, I pushed a lawnmower around the city of Texline, which was only 430 population, but I mowed lawns all summer long. And the money I made and everything, because my dad worked 2 jobs just to try to make ends meet. And so the money I made, in the fall, they would have a county fair in Clayton, New Mexico. And so I would always take that money and share it with my brother and 2 sisters to ride the carnival rides. But I wanted this 20 gauge shotgun. And so there was a store in Clayton called Gamble's. And my dad went in with me. And this 20 gauge pump shotgun was $100. And I didn't think I could afford it. And they had a 410 shotgun there, bolt action, that was only, at the time, I think 1995. And I said, I'll take that one. And my dad pulled me off to the side and he said, son, he said, if you buy that 410, you will never be happy with it. He said, they'll let you make payments with this 20 gauge. He said, buy something that you will be happy with. And that has always stuck with me. Every time I try to cut corners and buy something cheap, I regret it, because it always costs me in the long run. And so when I buy something, it's usually quality. And I try to apply that to other things in my life as well. When I do something, I try to make it quality rather than just trying to get by. Because he was right. I would be much happier. Here's the problem with Joaz, though. As I said, not a good trait in a leader is to listen to others. And so as we look at 2 Chronicles chapter 24, we're going to go ahead and read 17 through 22. We read 1 and 2, but let's read 17 through 22. And what we find here is when Jehoiada died, this is when Joash began to listen to others, and this was his downfall. You had that, Mindy?
After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and worshipped Asherah, poles, and idols. Because of their guilt, God's anger came on Judah and Jerusalem. Although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back to him, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. Then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, son of Jehoiada, the priest. He stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you." But they plotted against him, and by the order of the king they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. King Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but killed his son, who said as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account."
All right, so what we see there in verses 17 and 18, obviously, Joash began listening to other individuals. And these individuals that he were listening to happened to be evil individuals instead of good individuals. And so they were leading him astray. And so verse 19 tells us that even though God sent prophets to Joaz, he would not listen to these prophets that God sent to him. He already developed a habit of following sin at this point because of the people that he was listening to. So eventually Joaz has the son of Jehoiada, Zechariah, was stoned for speaking against him. This is how bad the habits became because of listening to the wrong people. As long as Jehoiada was alive and leading him in the right direction, things were great. But when Jehoiada died and he began listening to other individuals, he was led astray. As I was growing up, I had two friends. Both of them was in the class ahead of me, and they both dropped out of school. They didn't apply themselves, I'll put it this way. It wasn't that they weren't smart, because they could have been. They just didn't apply themselves, and their parents did not force them to continue on with school. And I grew up with these two individuals, and we did a lot of things. We hunted together, we played together, and they were the ones that developed, had some of those bad habits. They were the ones that got me drunk. Actually, they didn't get me drunk. I got myself drunk by allowing them to influence me. They were the ones that helped me try smoking. Fortunately, I didn't enjoy that. But one of them, my brother, who is younger than me, there were some girls that came down from Clayton, New Mexico, and he was working at a filling station, and he was attracted to them, and they were attracted to him and everything. And so this one friend of mine was somewhat jealous and decided he was going to whip the person who was flirting with these girls, because he wanted these girls, and he didn't know who it was. When I found out it was my brother and everything, then we basically had two cars. My car was loaded with 3 people, my brother and 2 other people, and their car was loaded with 3 people. And so we went outside right near the state line, and my brother and this boy had a fight. It was basically a draw and everything, no blood or anything like that. And the reason I told you this story is because that moment I never spoke to that individual again. Never spoke to him again. had no clue what's going on. The other one then eventually committed suicide. He married a gal, and I don't know, they were having some problems, and he pulled his car into the garage, closed the garage door, and left the car running and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. But the one, I don't know what's going on with him. The point is that they were some bad people. Joaz here was dealing with some bad people. And so because of all this evil and everything, Joaz started out good but turned out to be bad because of the influence of the people he surrounded himself with. We must be careful to instill proper moral habits that have roots deep enough into the person's character that they will not stray and will not allow other people to have negative influences on them. Any thoughts?
Stoning kind of bothers me.
Yes.
Yeah, the stoning of Stephen bothers me too.
Yes.
Stephen did. Yeah, when he was stoned, the Lord was so upset about it. Actually, he stood up from his throne and looked down on the matter. Yeah. It bothered him that much. Anyway, Stephen was pretty special to say. Pray don't hold it against him. That's a pretty big deal.
And Christians will always be attacked. We see it in today's society. And you know, you look at Stephen, a man of God who did not lay that guilt upon them or anything. In essence, you can accept the fact that Stephen forgave them of what they were doing. He said, lay not this charge upon them. And that's the attitude Christians must have, because we are, in fact, going to be persecuted. We are going to constantly be influenced by outside environment. And we can allow those individuals or those environments to influence us in a way that is negative, such as Joaz did, or we can continue to be positive and avoid those things.
You know, there's something to be said about that. You know, there's some people, like the people that, like Paul, for instance. Paul was a good guy, but he was making some bad moves. He thought he was right. And it's possible that when Stephen, you know, was preaching to the same sermon to these hard-hearted Jews, that he may have held them in high esteem. He may have known a lot of these people. And but when they turned against him, I think maybe he just may have felt that maybe there's still hope for them. And I think that's really the case for those that did involve themselves in the crucifixion of the Lord. There was some hope for some of those people. 3,000 on the first day were converted. Yeah. But then at the end of it all, God gave them plenty of time. All these people had plenty of time before God ultimately destroyed Jerusalem through the Roman army in AD 70. They had plenty of time. Yeah. And so, I don't know, some people that you encounter are just bad people. You cannot get through, and you have to be very careful about that. So, you know, you have to be very careful who you're dealing with and what it is you're doing. And try to see the good side of people. And sometimes people will diffuse. Matters will diffuse. You know, if you can just, they see something in you that's just a little bit different, they'll just it comes. But if you fuel a fire, then you got problems. You know, be careful. Yeah, absolutely right. I didn't write these scriptures up here, so Karen, if you could turn to Proverbs 4 verses 23 through 27, I'll have you read that in just a moment. And Donna, if you would, 1 Peter chapter 4 verses 1 through 4. And then Florence, if you turn to Proverbs 22 verse 8. And Chuck, if you could turn to Hosea chapter 10 verses 12 and 13. And then Sharon, Galatians 6 verses 6 through 10. And the last scripture we'll look at, if we have time, John, would be 2 Peter chapter 1 verses 8 through 10. Okay? Which we've already read that, but we'll read that again. Okay? So here's the idea, and this is a good example for me as well, because
People who never drank coffee as a child can't start the day without it as an adult. And this is a habit that was developed. Now, when I was young, I never drank coffee. Now, my daughter-in-law, she's trained her girls to drink coffee at the age of 16. And ironically, when you look at medical science now says 2 cups of coffee a day is good for you. A few years ago, it was bad for you. So stick around a few more years and it might be bad for you again. Or they may say, well, we need to drink 10 cups of coffee. But when I was growing up, coffee was not part of our family. And it was not until I had been in the military about 8 years, I guess. And my last assignment was as a staff officer at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, before I decided to get out of the Army. I spent 11 years in the Army. And so I started out as the S4 officer, which is a logistic officer. And then when the S23 officer left, then they moved me over to that, which was a major's position, and I was a captain, but they moved me into that position. S23 is communications and security officer, intelligence, and all of that. Sitting at the desk all day long and everything, and coffee pot sitting out there with all the NCOs and everything, that began to be something that I started walking around with a coffee cup in my hand. Now today I have 2 cups of coffee every morning, and that's it. But that was a habit that I learned as a result of being around other people that constantly drank coffee and sitting around having nothing to do and wanting to have something in my hand. But as a young child, that was never anything I drank. I had no desire to drink it. In Proverbs, the 4th chapter, verses 23 through 27, we come to expect that habits come from repetition. Karen, you had that?
Yes. Keep your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you crooked speech, but put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil.
Now, had I not started looking at those NCOs drinking that coffee and smelling that coffee every day and everything, I might have been able to keep my eyes straight forward and not ever involved myself in drinking coffee. But nonetheless, that's a habit that I have today because of past repetition. The idea, though, is that even bad habits can be broken with repeated good moral actions, and that's what we see in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. Donna?
Therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh no longer for the lust of men, but for the will of God. For the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. In all of this they are surprised that you do not run with them into the same excess of dispensation, and they malign you.
I think it ironic that when we were at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, we started out going to a congregation that was a very liberal congregation. And they had decided that they were going to put a young man in as a deacon, and he smoked. And the reason I knew he smoked is because he was a NCO in the battalion where I worked. Now, he was a good guy, and he was a good song leader and everything. And so the elder said, if you have any reason why this individual should not serve as deacon, put it in writing. So I did. And they called me in and talked to me and everything and said, we see no reason why he shouldn't serve as a deacon. And we'd like you to teach an adult Bible class for us. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, you know he smokes. And they said, well, because he smokes, we feel that he can do some good things as a deacon, but we would not allow him to teach a Bible class because of the negative influence he would have with his use of tobacco. And I said, so you think that it would be wrong for him to teach? They said, yes. I said, then what do you consider singing? Because you have him leading singing, and aren't we taught to teach and admonish one another through songs and hymns? Well, we don't see that as a problem. I said, so I suppose then that you probably do not see social drinking as a problem either. And they said, no, we can't find anything in the scriptures that suggests social drinking is bad for you. And so, I looked at 1 Peter with them and discussed 1 Peter with them and everything. But it came to the point that I finally told them, I said, I think I'd be wrong if I continue to come here because I can't agree with your position on these things. And so we left that congregation. That congregation has become even more liberal today to the point that they should just go ahead and hang a First Christian sign up on the doors. And they're pretty much that way. But as Peter says here in 1 Peter chapter 4, even bad habits can be broken if we have repeated good moral actions. And at first it takes a lot of conscious effort to stop an immoral action. You have to wrestle with your own inclinations in this situation. You have to be convinced that what you're doing is wrong, and you have to make a conscious effort to try to change that habit. Bad habits left unchecked can and will bring sorrow. Look at Proverbs 22 and verse 8, Florence.
He who sows iniquity will reap sorrow, and the rod of his anger will fail.
So it goes both ways then when you think about an individual, whether we're talking about a Christian, whether we're talking about a non-Christian. And non-Christians can be good moral people. There's no doubt about it. I'd love to think that my father is in heaven today. But looking at what God has to say about the subject, realistically, I cannot hold that as a firm belief. Now, God makes that decision. I don't. But as I look at the scriptures and I see what I am to do as a obedient Christian, and I have to work out my own salvation, then I have to do what the scriptures say. So it does go both ways. What we sow is what we will reap. Look at Hosea 10 verses 12 and 13, Chuck.
Sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap in mercy, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he come and reign in righteousness upon you. You have plowed wickedness, you have reaped iniquity, you have eaten the fruit of lies, because thou didst trust in thy way, in the multitude of thy mighty men.
Okay, so Paul, when he was writing to the church of Galatia, in Galatians the 6th chapter, verses 6 through 10, really points out this idea is that while we have opportunity today, we must start sowing seeds of good morals so they may mature to solid moral habits. Look at Galatians 6, verses 6 through 10, Sharon.
Let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, we have opportunity. Let us do good to all, especially those who are of the household of faith.
All right, so let's go back to our reading in 2 Peter chapter 1. And we're going to look at verses 8 through 10 again. John, you want to read that for me, please?
For if these things be in you, and abound, they make you that ye shall neither be barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But he that lacketh these things is blind and cannot see far off, and hath forgotten that he was purged from his old sins. Wherefore, rather, brethren, be diligent and make your calling and election sure, for if you do these things, you shall never fail.
Paul.
What does the word diligent mean to you?
Do it with all your
Heart.
heart.
Do it with all your heart, okay? It is talking about effort, isn't it? It's talking about the work. Putting 100% effort into it. And we are to make our calling certain by the continual practice then of righteousness. In other words, it is a habit to do what is right. Any thoughts? Anything you want to add to it? These are all the things I wanted to just mention this morning. I know our second bell is just about to ring, but anybody have anything they want to add or say? Yes, Pat.
Is the word temperance in that 2 Peter? Is the word temperance there?
Yes, yes, it is.
Is that referring to drinking?
No, it's not really referring to drinking. I mean, it could be, but it's just one of the Christian virtues, if you will. Add to your faith. When you actually it starts up there at verse 5, but also for this very reason, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, and then let's see here. The word temperance is not in the New King James Version. I think you'll more likely find it in the King James Version. But basically, it's an attitude type thing, being patient, but it's not necessarily dealing with drinking.
It's not.
No.
Well, I've heard it said that you could drink, but you had to make it a balanced thing.
Moderation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what some people will use. You know, that's how they promote social drinking. And yet, when you look at what Peter said and what Paul said and everything, they basically said that it's wrong to do these revelings, these parties, and that's basically what they were talking about was drinking.
Yeah, well,
now they'll go to the Gospel of John, where Jesus Christ turned the water into wine. And so some people will use that to suggest that drinking a little bit of alcoholic wine is okay. But in fact, Jesus, as we always say, is a Nazarene or a Nazarite. And if you look at the Nazarite vow, they could not have any alcohol at all. Secondly, why would Jesus turn water into a alcoholic wine when in fact the Apostle Paul spoke out against drinking or drunkards and revelings and such as that. The Greek word for the wine there was a grape juice. And if you look at it, he didn't turn these barrels of water to wine. When the servants, his instructions was to fill those barrels to the brim. The idea behind that was so no one could put any grape juice in there to make it colored like wine or like grape juice, a weakened down version. And the host made that comment. He said, most people serve the good wine first and the bad wine last. You serve the good wine last. Well, think about it. You go to a restaurant and you order a soda pop, whether it be Coke or Pepsi or something like that. But when you initially get it, it's really good, isn't it? But as time goes on, it's watered down a little bit and everything. But still, you've already drank your fill of the good stuff, and the weakened stuff is okay. Well, here the bridegroom is saying, you save the best to last. What the servants did is they took a scoop of water out of the brim of those barrels, gave it to the bridegroom, and at that point it was immediately wine. or pure grape juice. And that's what he was tasting, was the pure grape juice. That was the one, that was the beverage that they used in those days, was grape juice. And so that was what he was saying there. But the versions use the word wine. And in fact, that's not a good, accurate translation. Any thoughts? All right. Well, that was our last bell, so appreciate your participation this morning.
So you serve with the two words that don't go together.
I did.
Yeah, military and intelligence.
Thank you, John.
That's good.
Chuck, we're not going to have the elders meeting
That's
today
okay. Don't forget
because
to mention, because Ron's gonna,
yeah.
so don't forget to mention,
I'm glad you're able to
Yeah. Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
I didn't read it yet, so tell me.
Oh, well, first baptism.
Oh, good.
Yeah, he said, just multiple classes.
Yeah.
And he finally got his first, and it sounds like 90 days into it, and I'm just tickled with it.
Well, he should be, because he moved into an area that there was no church at all.
That's true.
If you and Sharon want to meet with the other three of us this morning, we can do that. I mean, it's up to you.
I don't want to. I'm not. My mom just passed away. I'm not.
I know, Sharon, and I'm
I'm
sorry
not
about
actually-
that. I'm truly sorry about that.
And what he said about Stephen and some of them doing it, we have record one. So
Yeah. Yep, very true. Did you turn those off?
no, I didn't,
Well, why didn't you?
because I couldn't do nothing with them. So I don't know if I could turn them off. I'll try.
Should be able to.
Yeah, I'll try. That's why, because I forgot about it, because I couldn't do nothing with them. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to record off.